So this is the home page for my web page prototype for this project. As you can see, I'm using Just in Mind, and this is prototype 1 for the very first page, which would be our home section. And our running title so far is just Mapping Black Britain, since we don't actually have a web page up and going. And of course, our web page, the home page, would have an all-inclusive photo to kind of tie in everything that this whole site will talk about. I've got up here buttons that would represent the different tabs we could click to talk about, and obviously we could have more and we could have drop-down tabs, but these are just my examples for now for this project. And then I've got a brief introduction over here which says, "Welcome to Mapping Black Britain. This site was created with the intentions of preserving a long forgotten and buried history. We hope it will serve to inspire other scholars to further research, collect, and reclaim the history of the Black British people. The digital mapping aspect is a map that will always need additions, as it will always be growing. We hope that the map will serve as a constant reminder of where this history comes from, where it has been, and where it is going." And now I've moved on to prototype 2, which would be this section, just the history. And I've got a couple photos here, and these are just some young boys in the streets of London playing on a fence, is what it appears to be, while this is the skull of the woman who was found buried in London, who was traced back to African descent. This is prototype 2, same program. And then over here I just have like a little brief history of what we're going to be talking about with this site. I'm not going to take time to read that out. You can obviously read that, but it's just, it could be more elaborate than that, especially when you had colors going and a more ample website. But this would just talk about, the existence of Black British people and where they came from. So I've talked in this one about Oligos proving that the black population was present in Britain before the African slave trade. We're talking about how the Roman soldiers were there and how these bodies were found that documented them back to African descent through the Mediterranean trade, which is this blue-eyed woman who actually was African. And then talking about the civilizations that were set up before the slave trade, families that were contributing to the British population, which would have placed black individuals in Britain far before the slave trade that most people seem to think was there. Now this is prototype 3. Not sure why it says 2 up here at the top, but same program still. And this is going to be under the tab of Sally. Now clearly I have Sally and Linton here, but my main goal would be to have Black British tabs that would scroll all the way down, giving you a list of names you could select from to get the histories and background information on these individuals. And what I've done here is just placed a picture of Miss Sally and then put her full name right here, which is Sarah Forbes Bonetta Davies, and gave it information and background history on who she was and where she came from. So we talk about her being sold into slavery and being picked up by Captain Forbes and how she got her name here that would serve as her last name, and how she would arrive in London and be presented to Queen Victoria as a gift, who would actually take an interest in her and raise her as her own goddaughter. And we talk about how she was given education and how she was holding places in Queen Victoria's court, and not seen as a slave or as a peasant or as a worker, but actually as part of Queen Victoria's family. And that, Queen Victoria would go on to continue her education and would approve her marriage to Mr. Davies, and that would be significant because those were two high society black individuals of this time, which would signify that regardless of the past that they had come from, especially Sarah, who had come from, losing her family and being sold into slavery and being taken from what she knew to be brought to London to be presented to a queen and raised a completely different way, that regardless of her past, she was still able to live a lifestyle that would represent women of color before there really was a notion to represent women of color. And that's a major part in documenting Black British history, is documenting those early people who stood out, even if they didn't know they were standing out. Another thing that I've included, because I want this website and this prototype to be interactive, is that under here we would place a link that would link you to either a web page or a biography page or any type of foundations dealing with Miss Sarah's life, and you would be able to click that link, and when you did, another browser web page would pull up, not closing down our site here, but pulling up a second site where you could do further research as a scholar on Miss Forbes that we provided a gateway to. So this is prototype 4, which is going to be for Linton. And as I said earlier, excuse my voice, I'm sick. It would be the same thing as with Sally's. I'd like to have one set of sections for older historical figures and more modern historical figures where we could have a drop-down menu and have a long list of people to select from. But for now, I've just got these two represented. I've got a picture here of Linton, and then I've got a small biography. Obviously, there's such a mass amount of information I want to include that I'd like to have more space to do, but with this prototype, I just wanted to kind of give a layout of some of the things that I found super interesting about him, and that will also assist in the mapping section. So I've got Linton Kwesi Johnson was born in Clarendon, Jamaica, so that's going to start out where he's from where I'm mapping, and he attended high school in London where he moved with his mom. One of the big impactful moments right here that I have is that he actually would join the Black Panther movement when he got in high school. And underneath it you can see that I have a link, and I'd like to have a link for that to link off to the Black Panther movement webpage so people understand what it is and can see what he was involved with and the history of it, as well as it may benefit understanding why he got so into dub poetry as he did. And I go down here to tell you how the Black Panther movement, as well as the last poets, utilized percussion in their poetry, and his culture from being from Jamaica and the music that was there, and which is called dub music, would inspire his own form of poetry called dub poetry. And then we give an example of what that is. So it's, sing along almost to a melody. It's got the percussion in it. It's not actually sang as a song, but performed as poetry. But it also kept people cultured in Black history rather than just listening to hit songs on the radio or listening to normal poetry. It still told a story about the oppression that was going on and things like that. And some of the poems that I wanted to include, I wanted to link off here underneath his poetry, underneath his picture. And then also I've got down here that was going to help with the mapping about how he would kickstart his career at Virgin Records while he was still in London, but then he would not only circulate albums that he cut through England, but as well as the United States. He would perform in Paris, and he would accept awards in Italy, Jamaica, and so on and so forth. And that would help along with our mapping to kind of keep track of where Mr. Johnson was at all times. Now the next part of our prototype webpage would be the interactive maps and ones that would constantly be using data to track where everyone was going and where all of these Black British individuals were coming from, where they had been, and where they'll continue to go. And I just did a couple of these maps just to kind of get it started so I could give you, an example for the prototype of what it would look like. And I started with just where we talked about them coming from the Roman Empire and things like that. And obviously this is not a Roman Empire map, but through the program that I was using, this was the only one that I could find. So you'll see that it's located right here with these little pinpoints in Rome. And obviously my goal would be to find a true Roman Empire map, to pinpoint it that way rather than on an updated Italian map. But then we scroll down from that, again with the green pens, and we've pinpointed here in the United Kingdom map, London, and then just England as a whole. And that was really interesting to see that you could use the same color thumbtacks to keep track of who you're talking about. So this could be just the general migration of African descent from the Caribbean, from sub-Saharan, all that kind of things that came over. You could use one single color thumbtack to track that. And then when you scroll down, I've got it separated by different color thumbtacks for who we're talking about. And this one is when we talked about Sarah or Sally. And if you look very, very closely, and I'll zoom in a little bit, right here, when I told you she was picked up in Benin. And Benin is the actual country where the fort, that I'll butcher the name, it's like Odella or something like that, is where that actual fort was, and she was picked up there. And following that, she was taken to London. And you'll see I chose the purple thumbtack for her to follow. Now there is a neat aspect that we can do with this. It does require a paid membership, which is why I haven't yet to do it, but the membership is not overly pricey, where when you hover over these thumbtacks, you get a little sidebar where you can put information in, which I think would greatly increase the interactiveness of this prototype as well as just a general mapping situation. If that's not something we wanted to do, depending on how many pins we're going to have in the area, we could do a little text box off the side. Also, when you do the paid membership for SmartDraw, you do lose this watermark across it, but that is not something I was looking to do right now, so the watermark is there, so I apologize for that. And when you scroll down a little further, this is where I mapped Mr. Johnson's movement, and I didn't do all of his movement just because some of it wasn't extremely specific, but this is a map of Jamaica, and it's not split up by different sections, but right here in the middle is Clarendon, and he has a red pin, and if we follow it, we will follow it to, again, London, where he moved with his mother right here. And then we can follow it down even further to Paris, where he received his rewards, or awards. You can see right there, it follows that Paris line. And that's how the maps are done in this particular program that I utilized. And I think if we were to maybe create an account specifically for scholars and students to use and continue to add with in this particular program in class, that it would be even more beneficial than it's already proving to be, just for the added features that come along with the advanced subscription.